I want you to close your eyes for just a moment. Try to remember the exact smell of night-blooming jasmine wrapped around an iron balcony. Try to hear the rhythmic, distant clicking of amber worry beads in the hands of an old man sitting outside the local coffee house. Can you feel the heavy, warm summer air of the 1970s wrapping around your shoulders like a familiar blanket? Today, we are taking a deeply personal journey back to a Greece that no longer exists. We are going to explore 20 forgotten everyday rituals from the 1960s, 70s, and 80s that we lost forever to the relentless march of time. These were not grand historical events, but rather the quiet, beautiful rhythms of our daily lives that bound our neighborhoods and our families tightly together. Stay with me until the very end, because the final ritual we will remember today is one that will absolutely shatter your heart with the sweetest, most comforting nostalgia. Let us begin. Before we walk down these cobblestone streets of memory, we must remember how differently time flowed back then. In the 1970s, time was not something you chased, it was something you lived alongside. Life moved at a slower, more deliberate pace. We did not have smartphones demanding our constant attention, nor did we have instant access to the entire world. Instead, we had something far more valuable. We had the virtue of waiting and the profound gift of genuine human connection. Modern generations might look back and assume that because we had fewer material possessions, our lives were somehow poorer. But you and I know the profound truth. Our lives were infinitely richer in emotion, in sincerity, and in community. We spoke over low courtyard walls. We shared what little food we had, and we looked into each other's eyes when we talked. The rituals we are about to revisit were the invisible threads that held our society together. They gave our days structure, meaning, and a sense of belonging that is so desperately missing from the modern, fast-paced world. And now, let us wander down the street to a typical Sunday morning, a time when the neighborhood bakery, the Forno, was the beating heart of the community. In those days, very few homes possessed an oven large enough or reliable enough to roast a whole family meal. So, the Sunday roast became a sacred, shared ritual. Picture your mother or grandmother in the early hours, carefully preparing a large, round tin pan. Inside rested a leg of lamb or perhaps a chicken, surrounded by wedges of potatoes, swimming in a generous bath of olive oil, fresh lemon juice, and mountain oregano. You would often be tasked with carrying this heavy, precarious pan down the street. The air was crisp, and soon you would smell the intoxicating aroma of burning olive wood from the baker's oven before you even saw the shop. The baker, a man whose hands were always dusted with a fine layer of white flour, would take your pan with a warm smile. He had a magical ability to memorize dozens of identical tin pans, mapping them out in the depths of his fiery oven without ever confusing whose lunch was whose. Hours later, the journey home was a test of endurance. You carried the scalding hot pan with thick, woven kitchen towels, the sizzling juices bubbling at the edges, the scent trailing behind you like a cloud. That walk home, anticipating the family gathering around the table, was a moment of unadulterated joy. Let us quietly transition to the absolute stillness of the afternoon siesta, a sacred time that dictated the rhythm of every Greek summer day. Between the hours of 2 and 5 in the afternoon, the entire country seemed to hold its breath. Wooden shutters were firmly drawn down to keep out the scorching Mediterranean sun, plunging the interiors of our homes into a cool, comforting darkness. The streets outside became entirely deserted. The only sound permitted during these hushed hours was the deafening, rhythmic buzz of the cicadas singing in the olive trees. As children, we were strictly forbidden from making any noise. We were forced to lie still on crisp white cotton sheets, whispering quietly in the dark, waiting for the heat to pass. At the time, it felt like a mild punishment, an interruption of our endless playtime. But looking back, that enforced stillness was a profound blessing. It allowed our bodies to rest and our minds to wander, and nothing compared to the magical feeling of waking up in the late afternoon as the heat finally began to break, being greeted by a tall glass of ice-cold water and a sweet, dripping slice of chilled watermelon on the veranda. Now, try to recall the heavy, wet footsteps of the ice delivery man, a vital visitor to every neighborhood before electric refrigerators became commonplace. You would hear the distinctive sound of his horse-drawn cart, or later, his three-wheeled truck, echoing down the street long before he arrived. The Iceman carried massive, crystal-clear blocks of ice, using large, intimidating iron tongs, a thick burlap sack resting on his broad shoulder to catch the freezing water. He would deliver a heavy chunk straight to your kitchen, placing it carefully into the upper compartment of the wooden icebox. This icebox was the lifeline of the household, keeping the milk fresh and the butter firm during the sweltering summer months. The best part of this ritual, however, belonged to the children. We would gather around his cart like a flock of eager birds, waiting for him to chip away a few small shards of ice with his sharp pick. Sucking on those plain, unflavoured pieces of melting ice in the blinding summer heat felt like tasting a luxury reserved for royalty. It was a simple, freezing joy that connected the entire neighbourhood every single morning. We must turn our memories to the evening gatherings in the neighbourhood courtyard, the beloved Avli. As the sun finally dipped below the horizon and the intense heat lifted, the true social life of the street began. There were no high fences or locked gates isolating families from one another. Instead, doors were left wide open. Neighbours would drag their wooden cane chairs out onto the freshly swept pavement or into the shared courtyard. Women would sit together, stringing fresh jasmine flowers to wear as fragrant bracelets, while the men discussed politics or sports. Someone would inevitably bring out a small plate of feta cheese, a few sliced tomatoes dusted with salt, and perhaps a jug of homemade wine. This was our daily social network, built not on screens, but on genuine, face-to-face connection. You knew your neighbours intimately, their struggles, their joys, and the names of all their relatives. The sound of quiet laughter, the clinking of glasses, and perhaps a bouzouki playing faintly from a radio in a window above, created a symphony of community that made everyone feel incredibly safe and deeply loved. Let us look back at the magical, almost theatrical arrival of the travelling photographer in the village square or the local park. Long before every family owned a camera, having your photograph taken was a rare and monumental event. The travelling photographer was a figure of immense respect. He would set up his heavy wooden box camera on a sturdy wooden tripod, a mysterious contraption that commanded absolute awe from all the children. He wore a heavy black cloth draped over his head and shoulders to block out the harsh sunlight as he focused the lens. We would be dressed in our absolute best Sunday clothes, our hair slicked down and our collars perfectly ironed. He would hold up a small mechanical bird, commanding us to look closely and hold perfectly still, not daring to blink. The resulting photograph, with its charmingly scalloped edges and stark black and white contrast, was not just a picture. It was a treasured family artifact, a tangible piece of personal history, proudly displayed in the good parlour, capturing a fleeting moment of innocence that we would cherish for the rest of our lives. Now, let us transport ourselves to a warm summer night at the open-air cinema, the legendary Theranos Cinema. Going to the movies in the 1970s was a deeply sensory experience. You walked through the unassuming entrance and immediately felt the crunch of white gravel beneath your shoes. The air was overwhelmingly thick with the intoxicating scent of night-blooming jasmine and honeysuckle that grew wildly up the walls surrounding the large canvas screen. We sat in metal folding chairs, the warm night breeze brushing against our faces. The true ritual, however, was the food. The air smelled strongly of roasted pumpkin seeds, the famous passatempo, which we cracked open meticulously with our teeth, the shells forming small mountains at our feet. When the film reel clicked and stuttered into the magical intermission, a collective rush ensued toward the small canteen. We all craved a freezing cold glass bottle of orangeade and perhaps a piece of hard cheese pie. Sitting there under the vast, star-filled sky, watching larger-than-life heroes flicker on a slightly wrinkled screen, we felt a collective, pure, cinematic magic that no modern, air-conditioned theatre could ever hope to replicate. Let us walk down to the corner grocery store, the Bacali's, to remember the profound ritual of the credit notebook, the tetradio tu verese. This was not merely a way to buy food, it was a testament to the absolute, unwavering trust that existed between people. The grocer knew every family by name. He knew your financial struggles and your triumphs. When money was tight before payday, there was no shame and no complicated bank loans. Your mother would simply ask the grocer to write it down. He would reach for the small, worn notebook he kept tucked carefully beside the cash register. Or sometimes, he even kept a pencil tucked casually behind his ear. With a few quick, almost illegible scribbles, he would record the milk, the bread, and the bulk lentils. At the end of the month, the debt was settled with a firm handshake and a mutual understanding. The store itself was a wonderland of smells. Giant sacks of dried legumes, heavily salted cod wrapped in thick paper, and the sharp, clean scent of green olive soap. This simple little notebook represented a beautiful era where a person's word and their honor were the most valuable currency in the entire world. We absolutely must talk about the refined, deeply ingrained ritual of offering traditional spoon sweets, the gliko tulkutaliu. Whenever a guest arrived at your home, even unexpectedly, hospitality demanded a very specific, almost ceremonial response. The guest was ushered into the good parlour, the saloni, a room filled with pristine lace doilies and kept immaculately clean for such occasions. The lady of the house would bring out her finest crystal glassware on a polished silver tray. On small, delicate glass plates, she would serve a single, generous spoonful of preserved fruit. It might be bitter orange, bright red sour cherry, or even tiny, sweet eggplants, gleaming like jewels in their thick, heavy syrup. This was accompanied by a meticulously polished silver spoon and a tall, sweating glass of ice-cold water. You were meant to eat the sweets slowly, savouring the intense flavour, and then drink the water to wash down the heavy sugar. This ritual was never rushed. It was a beautiful, deliberate excuse to sit down, ask about the family's health, and honour the visitor. It showed that in a Greek home, there was always something sweet waiting for a friend. Do you remember the early summer ritual of washing the heavy winter carpets out in the street? When the weather finally turned hot, the women of the neighbourhood would declare a collective day for spring cleaning. Massive, incredibly heavy wool rugs and colourful woven kilims were dragged out of the houses and unrolled directly onto the asphalt or the cobblestone street. This was not a solitary chore, it was a loud communal event. Women joined forces, connecting long green rubber hoses to outdoor taps. They used buckets of soapy water and rough, stiff, bristled brushes, scrubbing away the dust and gloom of the long winter. The air filled with the sharp, clean scent of green soap and splashing water. As children, this was our favourite day. The street transformed into a massive, soapy river. We would run barefoot through the suds, sliding on the wet pavement, our laughter echoing against the walls. Once scrubbed clean, the heavy, waterlogged carpets were hoisted over low walls or sturdy balconies to bake dry under the fierce sun. It was a beautiful, chaotic celebration of the changing seasons and the power of neighbours working together. Let us cast our minds back to the absolute quiet of the early dawn, broken only by the sharp, metallic clinking of the milkman. The Galatas was a ghost of the early morning, arriving long before the sun had fully risen or the neighbourhood had awoken. He would leave tall, silver aluminium cans of fresh milk right on your marble doorstep. When your mother brought the milk inside, the real ritual began. Because this was unpasteurised, raw milk straight from the farms on the outskirts of the city, it absolutely had to be boiled. She would pour it into a special, high-sided pot and watch it like a hawk. The entire kitchen would fill with an incredibly rich, sweet, grassy aroma that smelled like the earth itself. As it boiled, a thick, rich skin would form on the surface. Some children hated that skin, but others fought over it, sprinkling it with just a little sugar on a slice of fresh bread. Drinking a warm cup of that freshly boiled milk before rushing off to school gave you a profound sense of nourishment, a direct, unfiltered connection to the land that modern cartons simply cannot provide. We must walk into the smoke-filled sanctuary of the traditional cafeño to witness the intense, daily ritual of the men playing backgammon. The cafeño was exclusively a male domain in the 1970s, a place where men went to decompress after a long day of hard labor. The room was invariably hazy with the smoke of unfiltered cigarettes. The air smelled strongly of roasted Greek coffee, slowly boiled to perfection in small copper pots nestled in hot sand. Above the low murmur of heated political debates, the dominant sound was the sharp, aggressive clack of the wooden backgammon pieces, the tavli, slamming against the board. The men played with fierce passion, their pride resting on the roll of the dice. In their other hand, you would always see the rhythmic clicking of amber or bone worry beads, the convoloi, spinning through calloused fingers. This repetitive motion was a form of meditation, a way to channel anxiety and pass the time. The cafeño was not just a cafe, it was a parliament, a therapist's office, and a second home, all rolled into one beautiful, noisy room. Now let us quietly enter the bedroom to witness the lifelong, meticulous preparation of the dowry, the troika. From the moment a baby girl was born, the women in her family began a labor of immense love and dedication. Grandmothers, mothers, and aunts would spend countless evening hours sitting by the window, catching the fading light to embroider, crochet, and sew. They created delicate lacework, heavy woven blankets, and pristine white cotton sheets adorned with intricate patterns. These treasures were carefully folded and stored in a large, beautifully carved wooden chest. When you opened that chest, you were immediately hit by the overpowering, unforgettable scent of dried lavender and sharp mothballs, meant to protect the precious fabrics from insects. The dowry was not just a collection of linens, it was a family's pride. It represented a mother's deepest hopes for her daughter's future marriage and household. Watching those women create such beauty with their own two hands, stitch by tiny stitch over 20 years, was a profound lesson in patience, devotion, and the immense value of handmade artistry. Let us take a trip to the rocky seaside during the long, glorious summer holidays to remember the visceral ritual of beating the octopus. If you were lucky enough to spend August by the sea, this sound is etched permanently into your memory. When a fisherman, or even your own father, managed to spear a fresh octopus, it could not be eaten immediately. It was incredibly tough. So began the ritual of tenderizing. The fisherman would stand barefoot on the jagged rocks, gripping the octopus tightly and violently smack it against the flat stone. The rhythmic, slapping sound would echo across the quiet bay. Tradition dictated that it had to be beaten at least 40 times, and then rubbed aggressively in circles against the rough rock until its tentacles curled and the flesh became soft. After this exhausting process, the octopus was hung on a makeshift clothesline, suspended between two wooden poles, left to dry and cure under the blinding, unforgiving Mediterranean sun. Hours later, roasting that sun-dried octopus over hot charcoal, squeezing fresh lemon over its charred tentacles, offered a taste of the sea so pure and intense that it ruined you for any other seafood. Listen closely to the memory of the streets, and you will hear the high-pitched, echoing call of the travelling knife sharpener, the troxistis. His arrival was announced by a melodic shout that sent the women of the neighbourhood rushing to their kitchen drawers. They would emerge from their front doors, carrying dull carving knives, heavy meat cleavers, and rusted fabric scissors. The sharpener rode a heavily modified bicycle or pushed a strange wooden cart. When he stopped, he would engage a foot pedal that spun a large, heavy whetstone at incredible speeds. As he pressed the dull metal against the spinning stone, a brilliant shower of bright orange sparks would fly into the daylight, mesmerizing any child lucky enough to be watching. the air instantly filled with the sharp, acidic smell of freshly ground steel and hot stone. It was a terrifying and fascinating display of craftsmanship. Within minutes, he restored useless blades to razor-sharp perfection. This man was a vital part of the neighborhood's ecosystem, ensuring that the daily work of cooking and sewing could continue without interruption. As night falls again, we absolutely must remember the sheer magic of the shadow theatre, the legendary karagyozis. Long before television dominated our living rooms, the arrival of the shadow puppeteer in the neighborhood square was the ultimate event. A large, simple white sheet was stretched tightly across a wooden frame, illuminated from behind by a single, incredibly bright light bulb. We would sit crammed on hard wooden benches, buzzing with anticipation. Then, the distinct, raspy, incredibly versatile voice of the unseen puppeteer would echo through a cheap microphone. He brought to life the silhouettes of the hunchbacked, barefoot hero, karagyozis, and a whole cast of eccentric characters. The stories were simple, filled with slapstick comedy, but they carried a biting, brilliant satire of poverty and authority that resonated deeply with the adults. We children laughed until our stomachs hurt at the chaotic beatings and the silly voices. Sitting there in the warm dark, surrounded by our entire community, sharing laughter at a simple shadow on a sheet, was a unifying experience of collective joy that modern entertainment entirely lacks. Let us remember the elegant, unhurried ritual of the evening promenade, the beautiful volta. In the 1960s and 70s, the main coastal road, or the central village square, was not just a place to pass through, it was the grand stage of social life. As the fierce sun finally set and the air cooled, the entire town would dress up in their finest, neatest clothes. Families, groups of teenagers and older couples would walk slowly up and down the street, back and forth, over and over again. It was a beautiful, silent dance of society. Young men and women would exchange shy, thrilling glances, a subtle courtship, heavily monitored by eagle-eyed parents walking just a few steps behind. Older women would sit on benches, gossiping quietly and noting who was walking with whom. The air smelled of sea salt, roasted corn on the cob, bought from a street vendor, and sweet cotton candy. The volta was not about reaching a destination. It was entirely about seeing and being seen, about proving that you belong to this vibrant, breathing community. It was a beautiful, slow-paced celebration of merely being alive together. We must travel out to the sun-baked rocky hillsides to remember the ancient, deeply rooted ritual of foraging for wild herbs. When spring arrived, grandmothers and mothers would take us by the hand, leading us up the mountain paths away from the village. They carried small, woven wicker baskets and sharp little knives. They knew exactly where to look for the best wild oregano, the most fragrant thyme, and the delicate white flowers of wild chamomile. As we crushed the dry brush under our shoes, the air was intensely perfumed with a pungent, earthy, spicy aroma. They taught us how to cut the stems without killing the root, passing down generations of botanical wisdom. Back home, these precious herbs were tied with thin string into small, tight bunches and hung upside down from the kitchen ceiling or the balcony to dry in the breeze. Your house smelled like a wild mountain for weeks. Later in the winter, when a stomach ached or a cold settled in your chest, those dried chamomile flowers were boiled into a golden, healing tea. It was a profound reliance on nature's pharmacy that made us feel deeply connected to the earth. Think back to the absolute freedom of the neighborhood street games, played fiercely until dusk. The dirt roads or quiet asphalt streets belonged entirely to the children. We did not have scheduled playdates or structured activities. We simply ran out the door after finishing our homework. We played intensely competitive games of marbles in the dust, our knees permanently scraped and stained with dirt. We played hide and seek in the shadows of the courtyards, or we organized massive, chaotic football matches using 2 rocks as the goalposts. The only rule was to avoid the occasional passing car. We played until we were exhausted, covered in sweat, and incredibly happy. The universal clock that ended this magical time was not a watch, but the flickering on of the yellow streetlights, or the loud, commanding voice of a mother calling out from a second-floor balcony, announcing that dinner was ready. You would run home, wash your blackened hands with a coarse bar of soap, and sit down to a simple meal of fresh bread, tomatoes, and olive oil, feeling entirely fulfilled. Let us step inside for a moment to observe the incredibly delicate, highly secretive ritual of the neighborhood matchmaker, the proxenitra, and the art of the arranged introduction. In an era where dating openly was heavily frowned upon, the proxenio was how society ensured its survival. Two older women, perhaps aunts or well-connected neighbors, would sit together over a demitasse of thick Greek coffee. They spoke in hushed, conspiratorial tones, carefully navigating family reputations, dowries, and character traits. They would turn the empty coffee cups upside down, supposedly reading the muddy grounds left behind to predict the future. But truly, they were calculating the perfect social match. When an agreement was reached, a formal visit was arranged. The young man and his family would come to the girl's house, sitting stiffly in the formal parlor. The tension in the room was incredibly thick. The young girl would serve the spoon sweets, her eyes cast downward, while the adults analyzed every gesture. It was a time when marriage was not just a union of two individuals, but the careful, cautious weaving together of two entirely different families. Finally, we arrive at the most intimate and deeply nostalgic ritual of them all, gathering around the large, wooden radio box. Before televisions invaded our living rooms, the radio was the absolute centerpiece of the home. I want you to remember Sunday afternoons, when the entire family, grandparents, parents, and children would sit in the living room in complete and utter silence. The large wooden cabinet of the radio glowed with a warm amber light from the tuning dial. You could hear the crackling static of the AM frequency before the deep, booming voice of the announcer broke through. We listened to serialized theatrical dramas, our imaginations painting incredibly vivid pictures of the heroes and villains, far more detailed than any screen could provide. Or we listened to the live broadcast of the Sunday football match, the frantic voice of the commentator making our hearts pound out of our chests. We looked at each other's faces as we listened, sharing the suspense, the laughter, and the tears. We were profoundly united by that invisible voice floating through the air, completely present in the moment, sharing a singular, beautiful experience together. As we open our eyes and return to the present day, we must realize a very profound truth. When we say we miss these 20 lost rituals, we are not truly mourning the loss of the wooden icebox, the heavy tin pans, or the dusty dirt roads. What we are desperately missing is who we were back then. We miss the slow, gentle pace of our days. We miss the safety of knowing every face on our street. We miss our youth, our parents who were still young and strong, and a world that felt small enough to hold in our hands. The 1970s in Greece was a time when our true wealth was not measured by the money in our pockets, but by the love in our courtyards. If these memories brought a tear to your eye or a warm smile to your face, please gently press the like button and subscribe to our channel so we can continue this beautiful journey together. But before you go, I want you to answer one deeply personal question. Which of these 20 rituals absolutely shattered your heart with nostalgia, and what do you miss the very most about your own childhood? Please, write your personal story in the comments below. Let us read each other's memories and keep the beautiful spirit of our generation alive forever. Thank you for listening, my friend.